Now we've got the host of MSNBC's Inside with Jen Psaki on Sundays at 12 p.m. Eastern and the former White House press secretary for Joe Biden, Jen Psaki. So good to see you again.
Great to be here. I'm happy to be here with you. A few things happening in the news.
Yeah, well, obviously the monumental legal news this week, Gwyneth Paltrow not liable for that ski accident.
I knew you were going to do that.
Yeah.
I know. I vaguely followed that.
Yeah.
There's one other big legal thing I was following a little bit more this week.
Yes, and that is obviously Trump is now officially a criminal defendant. He's indicted in New York. So I note that Trump's legal issues were something that you largely stayed away from as press secretary, but now you're no longer press secretary. So I guess, how do you think this impacts the Republican field? I know there's been talk about this kind of redounding to his benefit, but how do you think this impacts that field now as we head into 2024?
Well, if there was any doubt before the indictment as to who the leader of the Republican Party was, it was cleared up when you saw how quickly everybody, including Trump's former vice president, Mike Pence, his chief rival, Ron DeSantis, Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, all put out statements very quickly, essentially echoing the same language, suggesting that an indictment, the judicial system doing its job, was weaponizing the government and weaponizing the justice system. So they were all echoing Trump, and that tells you that they are looking to him still to be the leader of the party. Now, what's also true is he was already coalescing power or coalescing support, I should say, and taking it from DeSantis before this happened. But clearly what he's going to try to do is rally the Republican base toward him. He's fundraising off of it, although not that well, let's be honest. Even though he's raised some money, it's not a ton of money. But there's two stages, right, Brian? There's the primary, and this may help him in the primary to rally the base, especially if people follow him. It's a much harder thing in a general election. So that's my take as of now, but a long time to go.
Do you wish that this one didn't come first? I know there's been some talk about people saying, I wish it was the Fani Willis Fulton County case. I wish it was one of the DOJ cases. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm so accustomed to the realities of the pace of the justice system from working in government for 20 years that I actually haven't spent a lot of time hemming and hawing and wringing my hands about this thing, because the pace of justice is the pace of justice, right? You can be frustrated about it. You can wish things were in a different order, but these are all different jurisdictions. They're not coordinating with each other in that way. So there were certain realities here. What's also true, though, is that there are 3 other criminal cases. We don't know when those will be determined, when it'll be determined whether there's an indictment. And certainly in terms of a message talking about the January 6th and his role in January 6th, or his role in trying to overturn the outcome of an election in Georgia, is more in line with what Democrats and many people who are fighting for democracy would want to talk about. But, that's not the reality of how the justice system works. So we are where we are.
Yeah. Well, Trump's indictment here comes in the aftermath of him having lobbed a bunch of thinly veiled threats of violence from him egging on his supporters.
They weren't that thinly veiled.
That's fair. Yeah. Basically, just outright calls to violence, calls to arms here from his supporters, from, telling them to go to New York to protest, even telling the NYPD that they shouldn't protect Democrats. What are your thoughts on basically those outright calls to violence?
Well, look, first, it's a sad day when a former president is indicted, even as there's a lot of people in this country who understandably want him to be held accountable. What is even sadder than that is the reaction of Trump and many leaders in the Republican Party, which has been to lob targets and send out a bat signal that has led to hundreds of threats against the Manhattan district attorney. I think that is dangerous. It's scary. And we've seen the facts of that kind of add up about what the impact has been. What's also true, though, is I know that this is all being tracked, right? We only know what is available in public space and public information. And right now, knock on wood, there hasn't been a mass gathering, right? There hasn't been. I remember kind of one of the January 6th participants couple weeks ago being quoted as saying, I'm rooting for him, but I'm retired, right? So there is kind of an interesting component of this, which is, does he have still the same power to rally that type of dangerous, violent protest that he did a couple of years ago? And I hope not.
at least for his supporters, even if it's not a signal of, his waning influence among them, at least they can recognize that when he does these call to arms to them, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Like,
Yes.
They're not going to go and show up only to then get, they arrested like 1,000 people for January 6th. So at least
they've prosecuted a number of them already.
Yeah. So at least it shows that that his power to do one of the more dangerous activities that he does, which is, basically call together these mobs, at least his power to do that seems to be waning a little bit more. But with that said, I do want to switch gears here and talk about the Fox Dominion lawsuit. We have proof now that Fox is not a legitimate news organization. It is effectively a propaganda arm of the Republican Party. If you were still press secretary, could the argument be made not to call on them in the briefing room?
I wouldn't make that argument because it gives them more legitimacy and gives them more fire. I think the thing people should understand about the briefing room is that there are all sorts of characters in there who are not journalists, who have an agenda, who are their own versions of propagandists. And that is even more so in the State Department briefing room, where you have representatives of foreign governments. So I think, obviously, all of the texts and emails, it's not surprising, but it should be eye-opening to people about the fact that not just Tucker Carlson, but a range of people in Fox were not thinking about reporting accurate facts, but they were thinking about how to satisfy the desires of their audience to have alternative facts. That is the core problematic issue there. But to me, I just don't think that it's as easy as they shouldn't be called on in the briefing room. Nobody should do Fox, because in some ways you're taking yourselves off the playing field and you're giving them more fuel.
And I totally understand that. And I know that in the briefing room, you called on Fox a lot. And I think that in that situation, there is a lot of value in it because you were very good at swatting down disinformation. I think that the benefit of you being able to swat down that disinformation from like Peter Doocy was more effective than him just presenting it. So I understand that. But I guess the question becomes, how do you balance transparency with legitimizing a propaganda outlet that whose existence actually detracts from journalism, like provably detracts from journalism?
Well, I think, look, if you're just talking about the briefing room, then you have to say you're not going to call on OAN, you're not going to call on Newsmax, you're not going to call on any component or element of Fox. And my point is that is validating their argument, right, in some ways. And so that's why I don't think that's a constructive approach. I think the way that you call out the propaganda is you do exactly that. Right? You, whomever you call on in the briefing room or wherever you are, at the White House, at the State Department, you have to keep your ear ready for propaganda or for spouting of disinformation, and you have to cut it off, and call it out. And that requires being on your toes every day. But I think that's the way to approach it.
Was Peter Doocy nice to you off camera?
Yes. We actually had a very good relationship, and I have consumed my fair share of Fox, and the fact checking on a lot of what's on their air would be, would have a field day. You need a massive team of people, but I did find him to be professional, and in some ways, here's the thing. The things they would ask in the briefing room, at least when I was there, and my assumption is it's still similar today, pretty predictable, right? I mean, they had kind of, when I was there, a rotation of the border, COVID restrictions, and, one or two other things. So you kind of knew it was going to be one of those things.
Yeah. I don't know if you can answer this, but whose questions did you dread?
The truth is the hardest questions were not from Fox. The hardest questions were from the people who were deeply informed about the issues they were covering. And it sounds very obvious when I say it that way, but anytime I'd come in the briefing room and I would see like a David Sanger or a Peter Baker, and there was a big issue happening in foreign policy, I'd be like, okay. Not because the question was unfair, but because they were going to ask the hard, difficult to answer question, as they should. But, sometimes there's a lot of like, oh, Peter Doocy back and forth. I would say most of the reporters in that room when I was there asked hard questions. Kristen Welker has a way of posing questions that often make them hard to answer because she's good at her job. Now she's a colleague, but and Phil Mattingly knows more about Congress than probably people who work with Congress in the White House. So it's the same type of thing where you knew if there was an issue coming up, they would ask you or sometimes some of the econ reporters, right? They're going to ask you the hard question about the GDP numbers, and you better be on your toes. So it was a range of people. The Fox questions were in many ways predictable because there were some elements of the firebrand that they were rotating through. It was the people who were deeply embedded in the substantive stories they were covering. They always asked the harder questions, as they should.
Was it ever fun, like the volley back and forth with some of these right-wing outlets? Like, even if you knew what they were going to come at you with, was there any element where it was like the debate aspect of it was enjoyable?
Yeah, of course. Look, first of all, I don't think you could ever do that job if you didn't respect reporters in general, and if you didn't think the back and forth was fun. Not every day. Some days I would turn to my team before the briefing and go, ugh, this is like a Wheaties kind of day, or it's like, I got to have your spinach today, because sometimes you just don't have more information to share, right? Or you have nothing to say and it's going to be hard. But there were days, and these were the best days, some of the best days, I should say, where you knew that there was going to be a question asked by someone, what their question was, that was going to be misleading, and you were going to correct the record, and you had the receipts in your binder to do that. And that's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that said, what were your best day and your worst day at the White House?
Oh, gosh. Ever, or during Biden?
During Biden.
So my best day was the day that Ketanji Brown Jackson, now a Supreme Court justice, after she'd been confirmed, when she did when there was an event on the South Lawn for her. It was my best day because it was on the schedule. And after working in the White House as long as I have, you kind of get a little numb to things happening, which you shouldn't. I mean, you shouldn't. But I think I went sort of last minute to the event. I think I felt like I had a lot going on, right? And I was like, I don't know if I have time to do this. And I went to the event. One, it was a beautiful day. But two, I just remember sitting there and her talking, her speech, which I'm sure you remember, was so, so powerful. It was powerful. It was a historic moment. And it's one of those moments where you're like, I can't believe I get to be a part of this, right? I'm a part of history. I mean, I didn't get her confirmed, but like the small part that we all played. And I remember I started crying during her speech, and I was like, oh God, pull it together. Right. And I looked around and everybody was crying around me because it was so powerful. So that was the best day. There were many best days. I'm an Olympic.
I thought you were going to say the best day was the day that the president announced that she was his selection, because that was the day I was in the White House. And
well, that day's great too. But it's funny working in the press or comms office during those days. You're so stressed because you just want it to go well.
Well, talking about stress, like that day was also one day after Russia invaded Ukraine. So there was no shortage of shit going down.
Yes. Like those days where there's so much going on, you're like, okay, there's not enough coffee in the world for these days sometimes. The worst day was the day that 13 members of the military died in Afghanistan. And I remember that day so distinctly because we had been trying to better educate or inform reporters about how high the threat of a terrorist threat was, right? How high it was. It wasn't, we needed to do a better job. And I remember going to the Situation Room and saying, for the kind of daily meeting on Afghanistan, and saying to John Feiner, I think people are going to understand. I think we've made some progress on helping. And he was like, there's been an attack, right? And it's just like, and that day, it was absolutely heart-wrenching. You don't know how to meet the moment. It's like moments you don't know how to meet the moment for the president. And then I did the briefing after him. It was also the day of my daughter's kindergarten open house. So I went to that in the middle of the day. But that was the worst day, just draining and horrible.
Well, with that said, in terms of like meeting the moment and all that, now you have your own platform, you have your own show. What do you want to do with your show? What's your goal for it?
I mean, I've thought a lot about kind of what my North Star is, like what I want viewers to take away. And for me, I hope when people watch the show, they will learn something they didn't know before, whether it's about an issue where they didn't really understand it. Maybe they've like seen clips of it or seen the words, but they don't really understand what it is, or a point of view. There's always more below the surface. That's been my experience in 20 years in this town, in terms of why something's happening, what's going on with it, but also about people. And this is a big passion of mine. I mean, one of my big takeaways from working in government for 20 years is that these are human beings who have so many layers. And sometimes you only know one thing about them, their slogan. I mean, Senator Booker, what do you think of? Like, he's vegan, right? There's so much more to Senator Booker than the fact that he's vegan, or he's good on Instagram. That is another part that hopefully people will take away. But I also love the counterintuitive explaining of things. So that will be you too. We have shared passion here. So that will definitely always be a part of what we're trying to do each week.
How is it working with a teleprompter? Because you actually have the hard part down, which is being able to work without a teleprompter, just being able to work on your feet. Teleprompter is, you're reading words off a screen, but this is, I imagine, the first time that you're doing that. So how is that?
Totally, it is. It's been an adjustment, but I also think part of it is, and and a bunch of very smart people here gave me this advice, is the more my voice and my own writing is integrated into what is in the teleprompter, the more authentic it's going to be, which, like, that sounds obvious, but it may not be. Of course, that's true, right? So the words that I'm speaking are my words. And I also don't read every word, and I don't go verbatim. I kind of ad lib a fair amount, maybe to drive the people who are running it insane. But yes, it's an adjustment, and it's kind of remembering that, reminding myself that, I'm trying to kind of talk to viewers who are at home. Part of the thing about teleprompters is they're very impersonal, as you know, right? It's like a big black box, but I'm really trying to talk to the people who are on the other end, and it's trying to remind myself of what I want to project to them.
Yeah. In the rare instances where I don't read my own writing on teleprompter, it can take me like 3 times as long, because when it's my own writing and when it's my own words and they feel right coming out of my mouth, it just goes like that. But in those rare instances where I'm reading something that somebody else has written, I can get stumbled on almost every sentence because it's
me
just
too. And same thing. And when I first started, I was kind of reading other people's scripts just to get the hang of it. And these were well-written, smart, intelligent, amazing scripts.
They're not your word, like,
but
it's not
they
how
weren't my words.
Sentences, yeah.
Yeah, and so I kind of struggled with that too, because it's much easier to say things how you would say them.
What interview do you want the most?
Oh my God, that's such a good one. There's a lot, and because I'm going to give you more than one answer here. I don't have to do a big wind up to this.
Yeah.
I would love to drive around with Katie Porter in her minivan and just like explain things with a whiteboard. So I would love to do that. I love to go where people are in their environments, because I just think it tells you so much more about people. And and viewers learn more. I'm a bit of an Olympics freak, and also a sports fan. So Joe Burrow is on the top of my list. My entire extended family would come with me, so there's that. But I also think athletes, mental health, being in the spotlight is such an interesting. I haven't done this on the show yet, but I really would like to do this because I think it's an interesting component of it. I think there's like a ton of really interesting people out there. I'm kind of, this week I spent time with Danica Rome, who is kind of on my list too. So I think a lot about the people I want to know more about. I mean, just as a person, right? Who are they really? And that's exciting to me too. It's not always the most famous person.
Let's end with this. By the way, I have 2 interviews that are like my reach interviews.
What are they? I feel like I need to think about a better answer. Those are just like top of the head, but who are they?
Well, mine are people I've been trying. I have a list, and I've had to like whittle people off the list as I've been lucky enough to be able to interview them. And obviously President Biden was at the top of it, but now the last 2 remaining that are like my reach requests are Jon Stewart and President Obama. So
Oh.
those are the two. Also,
Those
I'd like to.
John Stewart, fellow William & Mary alumni,
Yeah.
which I probably overshare. Like I can like claim some connection to him, which I don't really have, but I still think that's amazing. I'd also love to talk to people like Senator Romney. And others. I think there's just there are so many layers there, right? I mean, I also worked for Obama against him, but so I have lots of different people that are on my list. It's a good thing I'm only on show 3, and hopefully they'll let me keep doing this because there's lots of people that I'd love to talk to.
Well, the irony about the Romney thing is I've reached out to a number of Republicans, and I'm sure you can imagine how many bites I get when I reach out. I think the only Republicans I've been lucky enough to book, and they've been kind enough to come, are I think Adam Kinzinger, Jeff Duncan, who's Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, and Mike Murphy, and that may be it. I think I'm missing one more. But in any case, when Adam Kinzinger is the most conservative person that'll come on my show, I think that gives you an indication of how easy it is for me to get Republicans.
Well, you're still at it. You're just like a smart, substantive guy. You're not scary. So people should know that.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. So let's finish off with this. How has the transition been from the public sector to the private sector, from working in the White House to now working at MSNBC?
The funny thing, I was out of the White House for a couple of years, obviously during Trump, right? So, and I was a contributor at CNN, so I had a little bit of a sense this is different. One of the biggest adjustments is, I had worked in the White House more than anywhere else in my whole career, right? And so, coming into a new place and a new company with new people, it was almost trying to kind of make my way and get to know people. That's kind of been an adjustment in a good way, though. I've really been blown away by how supportive. It's just like a really wonderful place to work. I'm not just saying that. People are like super smart and nice. And you just like walk around in the hallway and it's like you find somebody who's working on an interesting documentary or is like can explain what's happening with the banking crisis to me. So that's actually weirdly similar to government. But otherwise the adjustments are just thinking about what I want to talk about and who I want to talk to, and that is different from working in government. And how I want to integrate my experience and perspective in with people who are super informed, who I want to know more from. So it's thinking about that, which is kind of a fun adjustment, but that is new and different.
Yeah, well, I would highly recommend for anybody watching, listening right now, to check out Jen's show on MSNBC, Inside with Jen Psaki, Sundays at 12 p.m. Eastern. Jen, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Great talking to you. Thank you so much.